This podcast is based on the German podcast Föhr nach New York, Eine Auswanderergeschichte. Föhr to New York, an immigration story. By Honig&Gold, NDR Schleswig-Holstein and the Ferring Foundation of Föhr from the year 2024.
Föhr to New York, an emigration story. This is the third episode. If you haven't heard the first two yet, it's best to start with them.
My father couldn't say no, and the people didn't have any money and had it written down, and so.
Hi, I'm Bente Faust. In this podcast, I tell the story of my grandparents, who emigrated from Föhr to New York and later came back to Föhr. By the way, I called Inge, my grandmother, Ulmam, which is the Frisian word for grandmother. On Föhr, people speak Frisian, or more precisely Ferring, which is the Föhr dialect of Frisian. I spent part of my childhood on Föhr with my grandparents. For this podcast, I went in search of traces and visited the places where my grandparents lived in New York. For example, at the Kettelsens deli, Inge's parents. I talked to relatives and friends in New York and, of course, on Föhr. Ulmam lived in Harlem almost 100 years ago. And there it was. Back then, New York was not only the epicenter of music, but also played a central role in the global economy. Because this is where the stock exchange is on Wall Street. And there was one pitch-black day in 1929. And this is the day where we start our episode.
Föhr to New York, an emigration story. A podcast by Honig&Gold and the Ferring Foundation of Föhr. This is the third episode, Hay Harvest and Black Friday. About 15 kilometers from the Kettelsens deli, in the very south of Manhattan on Wall Street, the darkest day the stock market has ever seen begins on the morning of October 23rd, 1929. The stock market crash sends the U.S. sliding down a steep precipice.
The tremendous crowds which you see gathered outside the stock exchange are due to the greatest crash in the history of the New York Stock Exchange in market prices.
Poverty and misery spread. The Roaring Twenties, the era of glittering and glamorous parties, comes to an end on this day. Black Thursday, that's what the day is called in the U.S. In Europe, due to the time difference, it goes down in history as Black Friday. On this day, vast sums of money are lost, and market value is destroyed. This event triggers the Great Depression, the name given to the severe economic crisis in the U.S. that would dominate the 1930s. Inge also remembers it.
I have never seen something like this. There were queues everywhere in front of the soup kitchens. That was the order of the day.
The Föhr community in New York continues to meet in their Föhr am Römer Club. There, they discuss current developments. Many of them are still working in their delis, although sales are declining. Inge's parents, the Kettelsens, are no exception.
My father couldn't say no, and the people didn't have any money and had it written down, and so.
Of course, the Frisians are also affected, despite not having directly invested in the market. With their Föhr am Römer Club, they create what could be called their own Frisian banking system. Robert Klei from the Ferring Foundation has studied this in detail.
That's where the deals were done, over drinks and a little chatting. I need another $15,000. Can I have it? You shook hands and things were worked out. Or like, who's this? Ah, that's one of the Roloffs from Südende. I still remember the father. He's lent me money before, so now I lent him some too. That was the stock exchange, so to speak. That's where the real business took place.
And it's not just about money. Private matters, which have much more far-reaching consequences, are also discussed and settled in the club. From births to funerals and everything in between.
So, with all the men and women from Föhr there, the club worked out to also be a kind of marriage exchange. It was widely agreed that in the event of someone's passing, their remain would return to Föhr.
Despite this, the association does not take care of one concern that concerns little Inge. Inge is too thin. Not because of the recession, but because she simply doesn't eat enough.
I had a letter from school saying that I was completely malnourished, even though we had a deli. If my mother had to go to the front of the store when we were sitting at the breakfast table, I would quickly put my roll in the garbage can. I didn't like eating.
The solution to this problem: Inge should go to Föhr, to their relatives. They should feed her up properly. And the trip should happen soon, because she would turn 10 on October 19th, 1931, and as of then would have to pay the full price for the crossing. For the moment, she still pays a child's fare for the ticket, which is half price. A passage is quickly booked for Inge on the Albert Ballen. It doesn't occur to anyone that Inge might still be a little too small for such a long journey. And how would her relatives recognize her on her arrival, having not seen her for years? A pragmatic solution is quickly found.
And in Cuxhaven, my two aunts were standing there. And I stood by the ship and was supposed to wave an American flag so that they knew who I was.
To make Inge's crossing a little less lonely, her grandfather leans on his contacts. He knows people at the shipping company.
On the first day I was there for dinner, I ate with the officers from the ship.
However, this does not impress the 9-year-old Inge.
I prefer to eat with the other guests at the table. The first time I had to order myself, I ordered pancakes with applesauce. That was so great. There are such little memories. Yes, and I had a room to myself. And a student came every night and slept in my room.
When Urmam told me that, she was still a bit mad at her parents.
I think now, how could my parents put me on a ship for 8 days, alone on the ship?
And I totally understand her. I'm a father of 4 daughters myself, and I honestly can't imagine sending one of my children alone at that age on such a long journey. Back then, you couldn't send a WhatsApp message saying, "I've arrived safely," wink emoji. It just wasn't possible. You couldn't even make a phone call at that time. At least it was possible to send a telegram. Unfortunately, I don't know whether this is how Inge's parents found out that their daughter had arrived safely.
Inge arrives on Föhr in July 1931. It was to be a fateful summer. You will find out why in a moment. Inge is warmly welcomed into the extended family on Föhr. While her parents work hard in New York, her grandfather is now tasked with looking after her in Husum. She remembers these times fondly, especially having lunch together. They often had teal, a small type of duck that is traditionally caught on Föhr.
It was a big round at the table. There was me, my cousin who was so spoiled, my aunt, my uncle, my grandfather, a farmhand, and a maid. We got these teal ducks. I got 2 because I was so skinny. My cousin got 2 because he was so spoiled, and my grandfather because he was the man of the house. Everyone else only got 1. That's what I remember.
Inge enjoys life on Föhr to the fullest. Back home in New York, her parents always spoke Frisian to their children, so communication is no problem. She even goes to school on Föhr now and makes fast friends with the youth in the village in Husum and Zuiderende. Also this summer, Inge meets an older boy from the neighboring village every day. His name is Hermann Rickmers. Hermann recalls the encounter vividly, as he admits in a letter years later. At the time, Inge has no idea that Hermann would become the love of her life.
While Inge is soaking up a sunny Föhr summer, the Germans are suffering the consequences of the stock market crash in New York 2 years earlier, which has since grown into a global economic crisis. Even then, global financial flows are so closely intertwined that even German banks and companies begin to falter. Loans default, and industry, which relies on exports, collapses. The number of unemployed runs into the millions. Real incomes fall dramatically, and entire sections of the population become destitute. The state is unable to safeguard social benefits. And one party knows how to exploit this. The NSDAP, otherwise known as the Nazi Party, gains more and more importance. The Nazis become increasingly self-confident, and their slogans are particularly well received on Föhr. In the German elections of 1930, the NSDAP's share of the vote increases nearly eightfold. At 18%, it is the second strongest party after the Social Democrats. The Nazis are already the strongest party on Föhr. The Föhr author Kreske Ingwersen is an expert on Föhr's history. She explains how the National Socialists were able to find such fertile ground in northern Germany.
It was simply connected to the predominantly agrarian society here. The political landscape was distributed quite simply. SPD voters were generally those who came from the industrial areas, but there was no industry here. And in North Frisia, the population was almost entirely Protestant, so they didn't opt to vote for a Catholic party. Then the National Socialists came along and in many ways represented the values that were already held here. One thing should not be forgotten. The Frisians have been settling here since the 7th century. They have managed to preserve major parts of their language and their culture despite countless political and social changes over the centuries, which is quite an achievement. On the other hand, this is also tied to a certain stubbornness. This conservative mindset and the desire to keep things as they had always been fit perfectly into the narrative of the Nazis, whose values in many respects aligned with that outlook.
Nevertheless, democratic parties enjoyed high approval ratings at the beginning of the Weimar Republic. But the slump in agricultural production after the First World War was simply too harsh. Farmers had to pay high taxes and interest, and in their frustration ran into the arms of the landfolk movement in droves. From here, it was a clear path to the NSDAP. They soon found themselves in complete opposition to the system, as it was called at the time. Frisianism was nothing short of glorified by the Nazis and misused for their purposes, and the Frisians were all too willing to be instrumentalized. Hitler spoke of the, quote, blonde, down-to-earth Frisians as noble Germanic people, which flattered many. In the US, people are only marginally aware of what is happening politically in Germany. Due to the stock market crash, the Americans remain mired in a depression. There are more unemployed and more hungry people than ever before. Meanwhile, the Nazis present the world with an early taste of their megalomania. One example is the Dornier Do X, a 52-ton seaplane and the largest commercial aircraft of its time. It makes a stopover on Föhr during its introductory flight around the world. And this is no coincidence. Commander Friedrich Christiansen, born in Wyk on Föhr in 1879 and a member of the NSDAP in 1931, is sitting in the cockpit. When he touches down off Föhr, people come out in droves to marvel at what has landed. Christiansen later arrives in New York City, where he is welcomed by the masses. It goes without saying that the Frisians don't miss out on this either. The following year, Christiansen gives a speech at the autumn ball of the Föhr Amrumer Kranken Unterstützungsverein as guest of honor. Clara and Rivert Ketelsen, Inge's parents, are surely also in the audience. It is a highlight for the Föhr community. The economic crisis is hardly to be seen on Föhr. Inge and her cousins help with the hay harvest. The gardens of the Frisian houses are in full bloom. The kids go swimming on the Dunsum-dike and watch the ring riding parade in Oldsum. Inge admires the pretty Frisian women in their traditional costumes. The days are beautiful and long. The light remains deep into the evening this time of year. Meanwhile, nobody thinks of the dark plans the Nazis are making.
Inge returns to New York on board the Albert Ballen in the fall. She's a little stronger now, but still slim. She is very tall for her age. In a picture of Inge from the voyage, she is wearing a dark dress with a white collar. She nearly glows in the photo, her hair is so bright. Her family has since moved to the Bronx, in the north of the city, where Rivert and Clara Ketelsen have taken over a deli.
227 Willis Avenue, just over the bridge from Manhattan.
The new deli is a bit bigger and promises good business. A lot of Irish and Frisians live in the neighborhood. Rivert's cousins have their own deli on the same street. They can now help each other in various ways, such as saving costs by ordering from the same supplier. Inge and her sisters still feel connected to their old neighborhood in Harlem for a while. They keep making little detours to their old neighborhood.
And then every Sunday we took the tramp over to Harlem to church and walked back so we could save the bus fare and go to the movies every Sunday afternoon.
It takes just under 40 minutes to walk from a new apartment in the Bronx to Harlem. Wilhelm told me how different the Bronx was for her. In the 30s, it was a completely Irish Catholic neighborhood, quite middle class. I took the subway from Harlem to the Bronx in 20 minutes. To be honest, I didn't find the Bronx very inviting. The house where my grandparents had their deli on Willis Avenue is unfortunately no longer there. Now, a huge apartment block towers into the sky. It reminds me of the bad times of the Bronx. In the 80s, the South Bronx was a no-go area, with cheap drugs, high unemployment, gang wars, and an extremely high murder rate. But in 2008, when I was there the first time, it was no longer like that. When I returned to Föhr after the trip, I tell Wilhelm what it's like now and what's going on there. And she actually remembers the neighborhood in the 80s. She once had to go there to get personal papers from the authorities. She also found the area quite creepy. But now back to the 30s, to northern Germany.
On April 23, 1932, a group of men and women from Föhr set off for Flensburg. The women have put on their festive costumes. Their skirts are made of long lengths of dark cloth, artfully folded several times. The sleeves are made of taffeta, velvet, and silk. White aprons are adorned with elaborate embroidery. And on their heads, headscarves and hoods. In addition, they wear a silver ornament on their chests with an amulet in the middle, proudly displaying the cross, the heart, and the anchor as symbols of faith, love, and hope, the signs of Christian virtue. The group is on their way to meet Adolf Hitler in Flensburg. He holds an election rally there in front of 40,000 people. The Föhrs have a gift for Hitler in their luggage, an artistically engraved wooden plate. It bears the Frisian coat of arms with the famous motto, Lever duad us Slav. better dead than a slave, and a dedication. We want to be free like our fathers were. The Frisians have always fought and struggled for freedom and justice. That is why the Frisian stands in the front line of Adolf Hitler. They proudly present this plate to him in person. The Frisians have actually been proud of their independence for centuries, true to their motto, Ruim hart, klar himmel, which means wide heart, clear horizon. This best describes the inner attitude of the North Frisians: openness, generosity, and curiosity, and moving through life with a long-term perspective. And now this, total submission. Hitler is their star in the sky. Kreske Ingwersen, an expert on the history of Föhr and author, explains why Hitler, for his part, ensnared the Frisians.
And what could have suited Hitler and his henchmen better than to portray the Frisians as some kind of proto-Germanic people or embodiments of pure Aryanism? He imagined them as blonde-haired and blue-eyed, entirely ignoring the fact that most Frisians don't have blonde hair at all, but rather light brown. And also, of course, that traditional women's costume was interesting, as it was and still is rich and elaborate, so it made a strong statement.
In the German elections of July 1932, the NSDAP performs nowhere better than in North Friesland. Although the overwhelming majority on Föhr support Hitler, some recognize his dark intentions and rebel. They criticize the fact that rights and freedoms are being massively restricted. One of these courageous people is Frederick Paulsen, who was born in Dagebüll and later lived on Föhr. Coincidentally, he becomes friends with Inge and Hermann later in life. In 1933, when Inge is in New York, he studies in Kiel and distributes anti-Nazi leaflets. The Nazis subsequently catch him and book him into the central prison in Neumünster, where he remains until 1935. In April of that year, he flees to Switzerland. It is well known that the National Socialist indoctrination starts with the very young, even on Föhr.
We noticed less of the Reich's coordinated persecution in the countryside. The children's and youth group organizations were important to us. From the age of 10, the children joined the Jungvolk, and for kids between 15 and 18, the boys joined the Hitler Youth, and the girls were organized in the Bund Deutscher Mädel.
This is what 9-year-old Johannes Hinrichsen from Borgsum wrote in his memoirs. Johannes continues.
We were not particularly enthusiastic about military education. Once, when we didn't show up for duty, the platoon leader came to my mother and asked about me and then told her that we would be reported to the police if we didn't show up for duty. In 1935, one class at Midland School was closed, leaving only 2 teachers instead of 3. One classroom was converted into a service room, gathering place for the Jungvolk and the Hitler Youth every Saturday.
Many in the Führer community in New York look favorably on the old homeland. Nazi propaganda is also heard in America. Hermann's sister-in-law, Dina, writes to her family on Föhr in 1933.
Everything is full of Hitler. Here in the USA, you hear a lot about it too. Last Wednesday morning, he spoke on the radio. Jürgen was also out and listened to it. Hitler must have told them the truth. All the newspapers are full of it. He said there would probably be a war if the French wanted to occupy the Rhineland again.
There is also a German Nazi movement in the US. Some ethnic Germans organize themselves as the National Socialist German-American Bund. The group reaches their high mark years later, gathering with 22,000 supporters in New York's Madison Square Gardens for a Nazi rally. While the Nazis are establishing a dictatorship in Germany, President Roosevelt is trying to come to grips with the economic crisis in the U.S. It is hoped that his New Deal, a series of social and economic reforms, will improve America's situation. Nevertheless, conditions remain difficult for many Americans over the following few years. Even in the Bronx, where the Ketelsen family runs their deli, business is stagnating.
When I was 13, my mother moved back to Föhr with us. And my father still had the deli he was supposed to get rid of.
After careful consideration, Father Revert and Mother Clara decide in 1935 that the family will leave New York and return to Föhr. Things were simply looking better economically in Germany than in the States. So once again, it was time to pack their bags, get into a cab, and board an ocean liner. Once again, Mother Clara is traveling alone with the children. She arrives on Föhr with her daughters in the spring of 1935. From the ship, they can already see the beaches of Wyk. Looking closely, they can see swastika-bearing flags fluttering atop the sandcastles the children have built. Around 3,000 children spend their vacation on Föhr. The NS organization Kraft durch Freude, or KDF for short, sponsors their vacation. The people of Föhr also benefit. The holidaymakers bring money to the island.
Inge is now 13 years old. She is happy to be back on Föhr. It wasn't so long ago that she made friends here, and she's looking forward to seeing one boy in particular, Hermann. Inge got to know him during her last long stay and started to like him a little. Hermann is now 17 and has managed to convince his father to let him go to sea. He is currently on vacation and is on the island. Inge's father, Revert, wants to join her shortly. He remains in New York hoping to sell the business and make a profit as soon as possible.
What Revert doesn't realize is that the situation is hopeless. He simply can't find anyone willing to take over the deli. With many people visiting public food banks, hardly anyone can afford to buy sandwiches or fresh salads.
From the perspective of the time, the move back to Germany made perfect sense for the Ketelsen family. After all, the economy had been better in Germany since the Nazis came to power. In America, despite the New Deal, it didn't really take off. My great-grandparents simply went where the prospects were better. What a privilege that they were able to do that. Nowadays, you'd be more likely to call them economic migrants. Today, we know how much of an illusion the whole situation was in 1935. Back then, only a few people realized it. On the surface, everything is easy. Things are looking up again. In the background, the Nazis are dismantling democracy and building their dictatorship.